Hello Reddit. I never thought I'd be the type of person to share my personal life on the internet, but here I am. I feel like I'm drowning and just need to get this out. So, buckle up because this isn't just another "my wife cheated" story. What came after completely wrecked me. Let me set the stage for you. My wife, Lisa, and I have been married for 8 years. Things were great in the beginning. She was my rock and I was hers. We had that ride or die kind of relationship. At least, that's what I thought. We met in college, the classic love at first sight scenario. Our friends used to joke about how we were like a power couple, inseparable. And then there's Jake, my best friend since high school. He's been in my life for as long as I can remember, practically a brother. We did everything together: vacations, nights out, even double dates when he had a girlfriend. But lately, something's been off. I had this gut feeling that something wasn't right, but I brushed it off as paranoia. I mean, come on, Lisa and Jake? My wife and my best friend? They wouldn't do that to me, right? It started small: Lisa being distant, constantly glued to her phone, and Jake not coming around as often. I chalked it up to stress, or maybe they were both just busy with life. But then, one night, everything came crashing down. Lisa had gone out with her friends for a girls' night, or so she said. I wasn't the jealous type, so I didn't think much of it. I stayed home, cracked open a beer, and watched some mindless TV. But around midnight, I got a text from a mutual friend of ours. I still remember the exact words: "Hey, I saw Lisa at the bar with Jake. Thought you'd wanna know." At first, I laughed it off. I thought, okay, maybe they ran into each other, no big deal. But as the night went on, the text started gnawing at me. Why hadn't she mentioned running into Jake? And why were they both not responding to my texts? When she came home around 2 a.m., I could tell something was up. She was flustered, avoiding eye contact, and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before darting off to the shower. That was when my suspicions turned into full-blown paranoia. The next day, I decided to confront Jake. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I had to know. So, I called him up and asked if he wanted to grab a beer. He agreed, but when we met up, he seemed off, nervous, fidgety. I casually brought up the night before, asking if he ran into Lisa. He stammered something about not staying long and left shortly after. That's when I knew. Something was going on between them, and it was worse than I had imagined. I couldn't shake the feeling, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through Lisa's phone. I found texts between her and Jake that confirmed my worst fears. The messages were flirty, with references to them missing each other and plans to meet up. My heart sank. I felt like my whole world was crashing down around me. But the texts weren't the worst part. Oh no, the aftermath of discovering the affair was even more brutal than I could have ever expected. I didn't confront Lisa right away. I know some people would have blown up in the moment, but I needed time to think. My mind was racing, trying to process how my wife and best friend could betray me like this. It wasn't just about the cheating. It was about trust, the years of friendship and love that they shattered behind my back. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed a plan. So, I kept quiet, playing the role of the oblivious husband while I tried to figure out my next move. The days that followed were torture. Every time Lisa touched me, I cringed. Every time Jake texted me, I wanted to smash my phone. But I couldn't let them know that I knew. I wanted to catch them in the act, to have undeniable proof that they couldn't weasel their way out of. I didn't want any "it's not what it looks like" or "we're just friends" excuses. So, I started paying more attention to Lisa's behavior. I noticed she'd get weirdly defensive if I asked about her day. She'd go out more often, claiming she was seeing her friends or working late, but I knew the truth. Jake, on the other hand, became distant. He used to hit me up every weekend, but now he barely responded to my texts, and when he did, his responses were short and vague. Then one day, I decided to set a trap. Lisa mentioned she was going out with her girls again, and I casually asked if she wanted me to drop her off. She looked startled for a moment, but quickly recovered, saying her friend was picking her up. Yeah, right. I pretended to be fine with it, gave her a kiss, and watched her leave. As soon as she was out the door, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I know it sounds extreme, but at this point, I needed to know for sure. I had to see it with my own eyes. I followed her car for about 20 minutes until she pulled into a parking lot by a fancy hotel. My stomach dropped. She didn't even bother to check if anyone was watching before she got out of the car. And who do I see standing there waiting for her? Jake. My best friend, standing outside a hotel, waiting for my wife. I felt a surge of anger, my fists clenched so hard I thought I'd break the steering wheel. They hugged and walked into the hotel together. I sat there for a few minutes, my mind racing with rage and betrayal. I could have stormed in there and confronted them right then, but I wanted to be smart about this. I needed undeniable proof. So, I did the next best thing, I snapped some pictures of them going in. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I drove home after that, my mind reeling. I knew the next time I saw them, I'd have to confront them. There was no going back now. I had the proof I needed, and I wasn't going to let them get away with this. The rage I felt was something I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just anger at being cheated on, it was the betrayal from the two people I trusted most in this world. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind was stuck on one thing: how could they do this to me? The memories of our friendship and marriage played on a loop in my head, but they felt like lies now. Every laugh, every inside joke, every late-night conversation, it was all tainted. The next morning, I confronted Lisa. I waited until she was in the middle of making breakfast, and then I just laid it out. I told her I knew everything. She tried to play dumb at first, but when I pulled out the pictures, her face turned pale. She started stammering, trying to explain, but I didn't let her. I was done listening to her lies. I followed you to the hotel, Lisa. I saw you with Jake. Her eyes filled with tears, and she started begging for forgiveness. She claimed it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But I wasn't having it. You don't accidentally meet up with your husband's best friend at a hotel. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. A choice to betray me. Lisa's tears didn't move me. I mean, how could they? I'd spent the last few days drowning in betrayal, and now she wanted to act like it was just some meaningless fling? No. There's no way I could forgive her. I kept my cool, but inside, I was boiling. I wanted to scream, to throw everything in the kitchen, but I stayed calm. What about Jake? I asked her. Was this a mistake for him too? She hesitated for a second, and that's when I knew this wasn't just some random hookup. They had feelings for each other. She tried to deny it, but I could see it in her eyes. That hesitation said everything. Jake. I don't know what to say. It just happened. That was it. No grand apology, no remorse, just it happened. The worst part was, she wasn't even trying to explain it. It was like she had already resigned herself to the fact that I knew, and she couldn't talk her way out of it. I told her to pack a bag and leave. I couldn't even stand the sight of her anymore. While she was packing, I called Jake. He didn't answer at first, but I wasn't going to let him dodge this. I sent him a text, simply saying, "We need to talk. Now." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Jake. His tone was all nonchalant, acting like nothing was wrong. I couldn't take it. "Jake, I know about you and Lisa," I said, cutting straight to the point. There was silence on the other end of the line. It was like he didn't know how to respond, which made me even angrier. "Come over. We're going to talk this out, face to face." I didn't give him a chance to argue. I just hung up. While I waited for him to arrive, Lisa walked out of the bedroom with her bag in hand. She didn't even look at me. It was like she'd already given up on everything we'd built. I didn't say anything as she left, and honestly, I didn't know if I'd ever see her again. Part of me didn't care. Jake showed up about 30 minutes later, looking as guilty as sin. He didn't even bother with the fake smiles or casual greetings we usually exchanged. He knew I was serious. I invited him in, and we sat down at the kitchen table. For a minute, we just stared at each other in silence. I could see the tension in his body, the way he shifted in his seat. "So, what do you have to say for yourself?" I finally asked, my voice cold. He didn't meet my gaze. "Man, I'm sorry. I really am. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We didn't mean for it to happen." There it was again. That same lame excuse. Like it was something that just happened out of the blue. I wasn't buying it. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You've been hooking up with my wife, Jake. That's not a mistake. You made a choice, both of you." "I know," he muttered, still not looking me in the eye. I screwed up, big time. I was waiting for some kind of explanation, something to make sense of all this, but instead, he just sat there in silence. No excuses, no real apologies, just guilt. It made me sick. Here was this guy, my so-called best friend, sitting in front of me, not even bothering to explain himself. Like he knew there was no way out of this mess. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "Do you love her?" He didn't answer right away. That silence was the final nail in the coffin. I stood up, slamming my hands on the table. "Do you love her, Jake?" Finally, he looked up at me, eyes full of regret. "I don't know. I thought I did. I don't know anymore." That was it. The ultimate betrayal. Not only had he slept with my wife, but he actually thought he loved her? I couldn't take it anymore. I told him to leave, and that I never wanted to see him again. Our friendship, everything we had, gone, just like that. As he walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. The lies, the sneaking around, it was done. But that relief was short-lived. What came next was even worse than the betrayal itself. In the days that followed, the weight of what had happened started to settle in. Lisa was gone, Jake was out of my life, and I was left in the wreckage of my own existence. My home felt like a tomb, filled with memories of a life that was no longer mine. Every room, every photo on the wall, every piece of furniture reminded me of what I'd lost. I didn't know what to do with myself. I tried to distract myself, work, gym, mindless TV, but nothing could drown out the thoughts swirling in my head. I kept replaying every moment, every interaction with Lisa and Jake, wondering how long it had been going on, how I had missed the signs. It was like my brain was torturing me with every what-if scenario. But it wasn't just the emotional toll that hit me. Oh no, the aftermath wasn't just about the heartache. The real disaster came when Lisa's betrayal started to unravel everything else in my life. First, there was the financial mess. I had no idea that while Lisa was sneaking around with Jake, she'd also been draining our joint accounts. I'm not talking about a few bucks here and there, I'm talking thousands. She'd been siphoning money, claiming it was for bills or groceries, but when I looked into it, I found out she'd been spending it on God knows what. Maybe hotels, gifts for Jake, or just trying to live a separate life behind my back. I was furious. It wasn't enough that she'd shattered my heart, she had to wreck me financially too? I tried to get in touch with her to figure out what the hell she'd been doing, but she wouldn't answer my calls. Eventually, I got a cold, emotionless text, "I'll pay you back. Just give me time." Yeah, right. Like I believed that. But it didn't end there. The next blow came from my social circle. You know that saying, when it rains, it pours? That's exactly what happened. Word got out about the affair, and suddenly, I was the center of all the gossip. People who I thought were my friends started pulling away, not wanting to take sides or get involved. It was like they didn't want to deal with the mess, so they just ghosted me. But the worst part? Some of them knew. I found out later that a few of our so-called mutual friends had known about the affair for months and didn't say a word. They'd see Lisa and Jake together, but instead of telling me, they kept it quiet, pretending like everything was normal. That hurt almost as much as the cheating. It felt like I'd been betrayed not just by Lisa and Jake, but by my entire circle of friends. The people who were supposed to have my back had stayed silent while my life crumbled. Then came the bombshell I didn't see coming. I got a call from Lisa's lawyer. Apparently, she wasn't just leaving me, she was filing for divorce, and she wanted half of everything. Half of everything I worked for. She hadn't contributed to our savings or the house payments for years, but now she wanted to walk away with a huge chunk of it. And not just that, she also wanted alimony. I felt like I was living in some kind of twisted nightmare. Here I was, the guy who'd been cheated on, betrayed by his best friend, and now I was the one who was going to get screwed over in court. I wasn't going to let her take me down without a fight, though. I lawyered up and prepared for the worst. But even with the best lawyer, it was clear that this was going to be a long, drawn-out battle. Lisa wasn't backing down. In fact, she seemed determined to make me pay, not just emotionally, but financially too. The whole situation was eating me alive. Every day felt like a new low. I couldn't even escape the whispers at work. Apparently, Jake had been running his mouth, trying to paint himself as the victim in all of this. According to him, Lisa had seduced him, and he'd been powerless to resist. It was laughable, really. But the damage was done. My reputation took a hit, and people started looking at me with pity, like I was some kind of joke. I felt trapped in this whirlwind of betrayal, anger, and loss. I kept thinking, how did my life get so messed up? How did I go from having a wife and a best friend to losing everything in the blink of an eye? And worst of all, how was I supposed to move on from this? The answer didn't come quickly. But I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't the end of my story. After weeks of wallowing in my own misery, I decided that enough was enough. I couldn't just sit around and let my life fall apart while Lisa and Jake moved on like nothing happened. I had to take control of the situation, start putting the pieces back together, and stop letting their betrayal define me. It wasn't easy, but I figured it was better than living in that dark place forever. First, I had to deal with the divorce. Lisa had her lawyer, and I had mine, and it was clear from the start that this wasn't going to be an amicable split. She wanted everything, half the house, half the savings, even some of my retirement. It was absurd. We didn't have kids, so at least there wasn't a custody battle to deal with, but she was determined to milk me for as much as she could. My lawyer was a beast, though. He knew the ins and outs of the law and wasn't about to let Lisa walk away with everything. We fought hard. There were days where I sat in mediation meetings, watching her act like she was the victim in all of this, and I wanted to scream. How could she sit there with a straight face, demanding my money, after everything she'd done? It was infuriating. Eventually, we reached a settlement. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was better than letting the legal fees drain me dry. She got a portion of the savings and a small cut from the house sale, but nothing close to what she was asking for. She didn't get alimony either, which felt like a win in this nightmare of a situation. It wasn't perfect, but I could live with it. At least she was out of my life, legally, at least. But dealing with the emotional fallout was a whole different beast. The anger and resentment were always there, simmering just below the surface. Even though Lisa was gone, I found myself constantly thinking about her, about Jake, about everything they took from me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes without my mind spiraling into the past. Therapy seemed like the logical next step. I'd always thought I was too strong to need it, but after everything that happened, I didn't have a choice. I had to talk to someone, or I was going to explode. My therapist was great, she helped me work through the mess in my head, piece by piece. We talked about the betrayal, the loss of trust, and most of all, how to start moving forward. One of the hardest things to come to terms with was the loss of friendship. Not just with Jake, but with all the mutual friends who had stayed silent. They'd known about the affair, and yet they said nothing. In some twisted way, that felt like an even bigger betrayal than what Lisa had done. These were people I'd known for years, people I thought had my back, and they didn't warn me. It was like I had to grieve the loss of an entire part of my life, not just my marriage. Slowly, I started to cut ties with those friends. I didn't make a big scene or confront them, it was more like a quiet distancing. I stopped responding to their texts, stopped going to the group hangouts, and eventually, we just drifted apart. It hurt, but it was necessary. I couldn't rebuild my life with people who had been part of the betrayal, whether directly or indirectly. As for Jake, well, that was the hardest part. He tried to reach out a few times, sent some half-assed apologies via text, but I ignored them. There was no coming back from what he did. The best friend I thought I had was gone, and I wasn't about to let him back into my life. In the end, I blocked him. It was the only way I could move forward without constantly being reminded of what he did. It took a long time, but I eventually started feeling like myself again. I threw myself into work, got back into my hobbies, and even started going out more. I wasn't ready to date, honestly. I wasn't sure I'd ever trust someone like that again, but I was learning to enjoy my own company, to find happiness in things that weren't tied to other people. It was liberating, in a way, to know that I could rebuild my life on my terms. But just when I thought I was finally moving past the worst of it, the universe threw another curveball at me. I got a message from Lisa, out of the blue. It had been months since the divorce was finalized, and I hadn't heard from her since. My first instinct was to delete it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was short and to the point: I need to talk. It's important. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. I wasn't sure what she wanted. Maybe she wanted to apologize, or maybe she was just trying to stir up more drama. Either way, I needed to know what she had to say. I thought the worst was over, but it turns out, the real bombshell was still to come. When I agreed to meet Lisa, I had no idea what to expect. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she was going to beg for forgiveness, maybe she had some kind of explanation, or maybe she was just going to add another layer of hurt. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be another gut punch, but against my better judgment, I went through with it. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. When I walked in, I spotted her right away. She looked different, tired, anxious, almost like she'd aged overnight. A part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but then I remembered everything she'd put me through, and any trace of sympathy vanished. I sat down across from her without saying a word. She glanced up at me with this awkward, forced smile, but I didn't return it. I wasn't here to make small talk or catch up. I wanted to know what was so important that she had to drag me back into this mess. After what felt like an eternity of silence, she finally spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. "You said that before. What do you really want, Lisa?" She took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the table. "There's something you need to know. About Jake." At the mention of his name, my stomach turned. I was done with him, done with everything related to him, and I had no interest in rehashing the past. "I don't care about Jake. Whatever you're here to say, just get to the point." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw real fear in them. She hesitated, then finally blurted out the words that would turn my world upside down once again: "I'm pregnant." I stared at her, my brain struggling to process what she'd just said. Pregnant? It didn't make sense. We hadn't been together for months, and if she was pregnant, that could only mean one thing. "Is it Jake's?" I asked, my voice icy. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Jake and Lisa, the two people who had destroyed my life, were now having a child together. It was like the universe was playing some cruel joke on me, as if losing my wife and my best friend wasn't enough. Now, they were going to start a family together? I couldn't even speak. I just sat there, staring at her, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Lisa started talking again, her voice trembling as she tried to explain herself, but I didn't hear a word she said. All I could think about was how utterly twisted and unfair this whole situation was. Eventually, I snapped back to reality, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Why are you telling me this, Lisa? What do you expect me to do with this information?" She wiped her eyes, looking more broken than I'd ever seen her. "I don't know," she admitted. I felt like you deserved to know. I didn't want you to hear it from someone else." I shook my head in disbelief. "You felt like I deserved to know? That's rich, coming from you. You didn't care about what I deserved when you were sneaking around behind my back with Jake." Now, all of a sudden, you're worried about how I feel? She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at her hands, tears silently streaming down her face. I should have felt something: anger, sadness, betrayal, but all I felt was numb. I'd already been through every possible emotion with these two, and this just felt like the final nail in the coffin. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to feel. It was over. I don't want to hear from you again, Lisa, I said finally, standing up from the table. I don't care about you, Jake, or your baby. You made your bed. Now lie in it. With that, I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind without looking back. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit me, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the kind of closure I'd wanted, but it was enough. I was done with them, both of them, for good. The following weeks were a blur. I buried myself in work, focused on getting my life back on track, and tried to forget about Lisa and Jake as much as I could. I moved to a new apartment, sold the house we'd shared, and slowly started rebuilding. But no matter how hard I tried to push it out of my mind, the news about the baby lingered. It was a constant reminder that their lives were moving on, that they were starting a new chapter while I was still picking up the pieces of mine. One day, I got a message from a mutual friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. It was just a simple text, but it shook me to my core. Hey, I thought you should know. Jake and Lisa aren't together anymore. She left him. Apparently, it wasn't his baby after all. That text hit me like a freight train. I read it over and over, trying to make sense of the words. Lisa left Jake? And it wasn't his baby? After everything, after all the destruction they caused, this was the final twist. I didn't even know what to feel anymore. Should I laugh? Should I be angry? A part of me almost wanted to gloat. The two of them had ruined my life, and now they were dealing with the fallout of their own lies. It was poetic justice, but it didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. I decided not to reply to the message. I didn't want to be dragged back into their drama, not even through gossip. But I couldn't help but wonder what had really happened between them. Was it karma finally catching up with them, or was there more to the story? A couple of days later, I got another message from that same mutual friend. This time, it was a lot more detailed. They filled me in on all the juicy bits. Apparently, after Lisa found out she was pregnant, she assumed it was Jake's. I mean, why wouldn't she? He was the one she was cheating on me with. But as the pregnancy progressed, things started to unravel. There was another guy in the picture, some random fling she did during the same time she was with Jake. And when the baby was born, it was pretty clear that it wasn't Jake's kid. The details were messy, but in short, Lisa had lied to Jake just like she'd lied to me. And when the truth came out, Jake couldn't handle it. They fought, things got ugly, and eventually, Lisa walked out on him, taking her baby with her. Jake, from what I heard, was a complete wreck. He lost his job, started drinking, and basically hit rock bottom. It was strange hearing all of this. There was a time when news like this would have brought me some sense of satisfaction. I would have relished the idea of Jake and Lisa's lives falling apart after what they did to me. But instead of feeling triumphant, I just felt tired. Exhausted by the whole situation. Their betrayal had already taken so much from me, and I didn't want to give it any more of my energy. Still, the curiosity lingered. I knew it wasn't healthy, but I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to know if Jake really was the broken mess everyone said he was. So, one night, against my better judgment, I drove by his place. It wasn't far from where I lived, and I knew the route by heart. His house was dark, the front lawn overgrown, and his car wasn't in the driveway. It didn't look like anyone was living there anymore. The next day, I heard through the grapevine that Jake had moved out of town. No one knew exactly where he'd gone, but the consensus was that he'd left to get away from everything. I couldn't blame him. His entire life had imploded in a way that was probably even worse than mine. With Jake and Lisa both out of the picture, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The drama, the lies, the betrayal, it was all behind me now. But that didn't mean the scars were gone. I still had moments where I'd think about everything that had happened and feel this deep ache in my chest, like an old wound that never fully healed. Time passed, and slowly, life started to resemble something close to normal. I focused on myself, on my work, my friends, and rebuilding my sense of self-worth. I even started dating again, though cautiously. Trust was still a major issue for me, and I wasn't about to dive into another relationship without being sure it was right. But I was open to the possibility, and that felt like a huge step forward. One day, out of the blue, I got a message from Lisa. It had been over a year since we last spoke, and seeing her name pop up on my phone screen immediately sent my heart racing. I didn't want to read it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was brief, almost cold. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I hope you're doing better now. Take care. I stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. Did I even want to? Part of me felt like she didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing I'd read her apology. But another part of me, the part that had been slowly healing, realized that holding on to the anger wasn't helping me anymore. It was time to let go. So, after a long pause, I typed out a simple response: I'm doing better now. I hope you are too. Then I hit send and deleted the conversation, just like I'd deleted her from my life. As the weeks turned into months, I realized something important. The aftermath of Lisa's betrayal had been worse than I could have ever imagined, but it had also taught me something valuable. I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. I survived the worst heartbreak of my life, and I came out the other side not just intact, but better for it. I didn't need closure from Lisa or Jake anymore. The only closure I needed was the one I gave myself. And with that, I was finally free.